Hi, and welcome back to Plan 9 Crunch. I am Joe Gibson, and when I'm not reading from a kaiju book, it seems like I end up defaulting back to reading about werewolves and wolfmen. On this page, I have read from Frank Delistratto's book on Lawrence Talbot a couple times, as well as Brad Braddock's House of Igor that included both Talbot and the Roma fortune teller Bela in sizable roles. I also have plans for more reads that correspond vaguely to that motif. Today what I have before me is Jonathan Maberry's novelization of the 2010 remake of Talbot's story, which I've recently talked about in a different video. Follow the end card to find out about more. Find more about. So okay, I don't like the 2010 Wolfman that much. I think it almost entirely misunderstands the original story and the original characters, the themes, the irony, the tragedy, the tension, pretty much everything it could possibly fumble. The parts more original to its movie fare a little bit better, and I think it improves over its runtime and its cohesion. But it's a rough watch for me, at least before this. Lawrence Talbot is one of my favorite characters in all of fiction, whether it's Lon Chaney playing him or Frank Delistratto writing him. And though I can tell that Benicio del Toro is trying to honor him, particularly the later haggard and depressed incarnations, his origin story needs the charisma that gets us to root for him through the moral ups and downs of his voluntary and involuntary actions. Especially if the movie will keep mentioning he's a prolific actor. We gotta have any of that in here. However, a book is different from a film. At the base level, it is a fundamentally different medium for conveying the ideas reliant upon literary skill and not directorial. A writer is also free to include more ideas and ones that are larger in scope. This novel includes some new mythology about how werewolves function and reframes our understanding of certain characters and their transformations. One of the problems, albeit a minor one, in 2010's The Wolfman is that the exclusion of Bela leads to the werewolf that infects Talbot being prevalent throughout the whole film. Thus, even though we follow Talbot on his journey, it's unfair to call him the Wolfman if another lycanthrope has been doing this all better and longer than he has. In the form of a novel, Maberry can afford to just say, okay, anytime Talbot transforms, I'll call him the Wolfman, and the other werewolf will be called the Werewolf. That's easy enough to square that circle. In any case, this novel also restores some deleted scenes from the final version of the film, with little evidence of previous drafts in this, as far as I can tell. But all of the restored content is still Maberry's and not what you'll find on the Blu-ray extras. This introduction to this take on Talbot in both is that he's a world-class Shakespearean actor, but it means different things based on how the analysis of literature necessarily departs from the analysis of the film. I do not think that you can deny that if our introduction to our main character is through an allusion to a well-known Shakespeare play, then that play is also important to the themes, journey, and resolution of the lead. Especially if it starts to mirror that. And that's why I think it's always weird to call back to Hamlet of all stories. Okay, so you want to intentionally ape the story that notoriously is unfocused between the revenge and romantic subplots, and only totally makes sense if you read it in an Oedipal complex. Cool idea, Mr. Pretentious Writer. Now, in this case, though, it is an astute analysis of the 2010 film. Del Toro and Emily Blunt do not have chemistry, and Talbot is a lot more focused on the conspiracy involving his estranged father. In Talbot's case, he failed to save his mother from his father and wants to avenge her, which, while different from Hamlet, is even closer to Oedipal complex turn story that Hamlet has become in literary discourse. Add in the idea that Talbot is emotionally numb, returning home to his death like Hamlet, and it further justifies its significance. Even so, that first chapter where Maberry lets us see Talbot playing Hamlet has a different and more important purpose. It restores Talbot's charisma. With a mixture of telling and showing, Maberry conveys the infectious nature of our attraction to Talbot, how he draws us in with perceived good nature, even while it leaves him feeling empty. It was at this point in reading the text that I realized I did not have to imagine such a miscast Talbot as Del Toro, but someone that can accurately portray the range of Talbot's personality. This allows for the deeper intricacies of this version of Talbot to emerge. He truly is very traumatized and numb despite his success and charisma, And while I usually like to see that part come after a more jovial introduction for Talbot, it works here. However, it works because the outsiders looking in still perceive the warmth they want from Lawrence. In the finished film, where the final cut postures Del Toro as a very quiet, mute, and depressed man. Not like clinically mute, he doesn't speak that much. Whereas Love Connection with Gwen makes no sense. This version keeps his mental state a private secret as he lives his life putting on his emotions to entertain others, which works better, I feel. It is more convincing that they would be drawn to him. Jumping ahead, Maberry also lends further significance to Talbot's motivations in the story, especially pertaining to his connections to Gwen, his mother Solana, and the moon, referred to in this new werewolf mythology as the goddess of the hunt. Seemingly not Artemis, however, just the personification of the way the moon affects these werewolves, and maybe a deity, though he also refers to other characters as deities. If you recall the famous line from Dracula, the children of the night, then a vengeful goddess of the hunt would be the mother of all things that go bump in the night. Sir John refers to the moon, the goddess of the hunt, as essentially a manipulative maiden. This in contrast to the old Frenchman who gives Talbot the cane, and who is also implied to be a werewolf in some manner, who refers to mothers as what makes life worth living. Different still, when Talbot looks at the moon, he sees a swollen breast, connecting his sexuality to the loss of his mother. Solana Talbot is Spanish in this version of events, and the moon is the other side of the sun, Solana and the moon. And so, within his life, they represent opposite but equal impulses. This also ties into how the novel improves on the central relationship between Talbot and Gwen. His attraction to her starts at her purity compared to his lifestyle, where he's coming from and where life will take him. And there is some internal category grouping in his mind where she and his mother are similar. Sir John also sees them as similar. Because again, this version of Talbot is based on Hamlet, but she also represents an influence that Talbot hopes can save and redeem him. However, it's a horror tragedy, so this romance has to be transgressive. She was engaged to Talbot's brother Ben. So there's something wrong, taboo, and almost predatory about him sliding into the arms of this grieving woman. When commenting on her curves, Talbot compares her to a goddess. And that illusion comes back at the end when she released him from his fate. And when he promises to find out what happened to Ben, she wishes him good luck on his hunt. So she's a goddess, commanding his hunt. From there on, even before he becomes a werewolf, this version of the story tells us that the moon guides Talbot in his scenes leading into his first confrontation with the other werewolf. Everything ties together when Talbot, mid-transformation, cries out for his mother, but the sound comes out as a wolf's howl. If you doubt the text's juxtaposition of these three characters, skip ahead to page 232, when Sir John's monologue connects Gwen to Lawrence's mother to the face of the moon. Yes. Will not be reading from there yet, though. Genuinely, this book adds purpose to the disjointed scenes of the original. That's a bit of a double-edged sword because, for all intents and purposes, the new parts of this text are a new take on the Wolfman I can imagine Lon Chaney and Claude Rains acting in. But whenever it snaps back to a uniquely 2010 plot point or line of dialogue, I am unable to imagine anyone but Del Toro and Anthony Hopkins, who are still great actors, but their takes on the characters here are not ones that I think are very good or even too cohesive. Still, the prose would be good enough to save the book on its own, even if it didn't have some of the saving graces. So let's get a bit deeper into that and read some selections for you. Now, usually, I have to choose what page to read from, whether ahead of time or on the fly. It is seldom that a book tells me where to read from, but evidently the previous owner of this book, because this was a thrift book I bought used, they left behind some highlighted sections for you to look at, and indeed, these are good selections to show off how Maberry's prose leaps off the page. So that's page 220, 222, 285, and 321. So 220. This is when Lawrence is back in the insane asylum, which is a major plot point in the movie. That's done better in the book, I think, as per most things. All he knew was darkness and pain and dreams whose nature were so intensely awful that he fled deeper into his own unconscious to escape them. Now, 222. The drugs filled every part of his consciousness and tore him from sense and order. These are communicating the more dreamlike aspects of the film, though it is a motif throughout, the film at least, that he might be insane, an unreliable narrator, things just happen within and without dreams, and it's hard to tell when those start and end. It's not that big of a component of the movie, just many scenes throughout. And let's go to page 285 now. He closed his eyes for a moment, etching the memory into his soul. If he died, then he would at least have had one perfect moment, and when he died, he would recall that beauty, so it was the last thing he saw before darkness consumed him. Good prose. That also is some interesting foreshadowing, as both of things will happen. He will get consumed into darkness, and he will die, but in the opposite order. Though his death still does free him, and he will think on that perfect moment when, as he's dying. It's a more tragic than it even sounds like in that passage when it comes up. And now switching from a pink highlight to a salmon-colored highlight. Something suddenly snapped in Lawrence's mind. The fear and despair that were wrapped like barbed wire around his soul broke. Weariness dropped away like a discarded garment, and all that remained was a towering rage that gave him the power to get off his knees and climb to his feet. Now this is when Lawrence and Sir John start to fight. And Maberry has insights into Lawrence and Sir John that make it much more interesting to read than it is to see. You may or may not know this. I don't find werewolf on werewolf fights that interesting. It's the same kind of creature fighting each other. There's not that much tension because the main one's always going to win. How many times has there been a character fighting an exact copy of themselves and they lose? Also, the choreography is so much less interesting in the werewolf on werewolf fights because it comes down to one lucky throat bite, essentially. When a werewolf's fighting a vampire or a werewolf is fighting humans, so much more tension there because you can't just do the same moves to kill each other. Anyway. Well, I highly recommend this novel, actually. So much better than the movie is. And the ISBN, if this will help you find it or help me avoid copyright here, is 978-07653-65163. Should be easy enough to find. I had to buy it used in order to get this on time, but I enjoyed it a lot. And on this page, we read something every week. Look into our corpus of that as well, if you'd like. Subscribe, though I won't force you to. Also look at our blog, planetcrash.com, or our Facebook page, TikTok page. Thank you all for watching. That's a wrap.